Welcome back, Pack members. Today's story is a masterclass in which mistakes were made. Imagine mistaking the Alpha King for furniture. Yeah, it gets wild. But first, Pack roll call. We are taking over the globe, so hit pause, scroll down, and tell me. Where are you listening from right now? The US? London? Drop your flag in the comments and let's see which country runs the pack today. And while you're down there, hit that like button and subscribe to officially join the pack. It tells YouTube you want more alpha romances in your feed. Ready? Let's dive in. The velvet armchair growled at me. That was the first clue that my evening had taken a disastrous turn. The second clue was the realization that furniture, typically speaking, didn't have rock-hard thighs or a heartbeat that thumped against my lower back like a war drum. I froze, my hand still resting affectionately on what I had assumed was a very firm, very expensive armrest. It wasn't an armrest. It was a bicep thicker than my neck. The darkness of the VIP alcove suddenly felt less like a sanctuary and more like the inside of a predator's mouth. I had 3 seconds to formulate a plan. Option A, apologize and roll away. Option B, fake my own death immediately. Option C, blame the Fae-wine and pray for a quick execution. Before I could choose, the chair shifted, a massive hand locked onto my hip, and the air in the room vanished. Chapter 1. In my defense, the Royal Solstice Ball was a sensory nightmare designed specifically to torture introverts. The perfume of 300 desperate socialites mixed with the musk of aggressive alphas created a scent profile I could only describe as desperation and Axe body spray. As a Royal Scout, I spent my life tracking rogue wolves through mud and freezing rain, sleeping in trees and eating dried venison. I could handle a grizzly bear charge without flinching, but put me in a silk dress and force me to make small talk with a High Council elder, I would rather chew off my own leg. So I had done the only logical thing. I tactically retreated to the buffet and engaged in aggressive negotiations with a bottle of moonberry wine. The wine won. It won decisively. By the time I stumbled away from the main hall, the room was spinning in a lazy, treacherous circle. My heels clicked unevenly on the marble floor as I sought refuge. I needed darkness. I needed silence. I needed to sit down before gravity decided to humble me publicly. The VIP alcove was perfect. It was draped in heavy crimson curtains and appeared completely empty, save for a massive shadowed shape in the corner. Oh, thank the ancestors, I muttered, my words slightly slurred. A chair. A beautiful, glorious chair. I didn't just sit. I collapsed. I flopped onto the velvet surface with the grace of a tranquilized sack of potatoes, wiggling my hips to find a comfortable spot in the cushions. The cushions were oddly hard, but I wasn't complaining. I sighed, letting my head drop back against the high headrest. You know, I mumbled to the empty room, patting the armrest beside me. This is the best seat in the house. A little stiff, maybe. Could use some lumbar support, but solid. The armrest twitched under my hand. I frowned, patting it again. Solid, I repeated, more firmly. A low, vibrating rumble started directly beneath me. It wasn't a sound. It was a tectonic shift. It started at the base of the chair and traveled up through my spine, rattling my teeth. My scout instincts, dulled by sugar and alcohol, finally decided to clock in for their shift. Chairs don't breathe, Rudina. The heavy velvet curtains were ripped open by a confused guard. Light from the ballroom flooded the alcove. The music cut out instantly, as if the orchestra had been struck by lightning. I blinked against the sudden brightness. I looked down at my hand. It wasn't resting on wood, it was resting on a black suit jacket beneath which rippled a muscle of terrifying proportions. I looked up. I wasn't sitting on a chair. I was straddling King Baldulf, the Silent King, the Stone Alpha, the man who hadn't spoken in a decade and was rumored to execute people for breathing too loudly in his presence. His face was inches from mine, his eyes usually cold and dead, now burning with a terrified molten gold. I opened my mouth to squeak out an apology, but he beat me to it. His hand clamped onto my waist, bruising and desperate, anchoring me to him. He didn't whisper. He didn't shout. He roared, a sound so primal it shattered the champagne flutes on the nearby trays. Mine. The command hit the room like a physical shockwave. Every wolf in the vicinity dropped to their knees in submission. Except me. I was still sitting on his lap, drunk, terrified, and realizing I was about to be in a lot of trouble. Chapter 2. Consciousness returned to me in slow, painful waves, accompanied by a headache that felt like a goblin was mining for coal behind my eyes. I groaned, rolling over and burying my face in a pillow that smelled like forest rain, ozone, and expensive spice. Wait, my pillows smelled like dog shampoo and regret. This pillow smelled like a king. My eyes snapped open. I wasn't in my cramped quarters at the scout barracks. I was in a bed the size of a small island. The sheets were silk. Actual silk, not the synthetic blend I pretended was silk. The ceiling was painted with a fresco of ancient wars. Memory crashed into me like a freight train. The ball, the wine, the chair, the roar. "Oh, no," I whispered, the sound scraping my dry throat. "Oh, no, no, no." I sat up, checking my body. I was still in my ball gown, though one strap had slipped off my shoulder and my shoes were missing. I wasn't dead, I wasn't in a dungeon, I was in the king's suite. This was arguably worse than the dungeon because the dungeon had an exit strategy I had memorized during my rookie orientation. The king's suite was a fortress within a fortress. I scrambled off the bed, my head spinning. I needed to leave. I needed to move to a different continent, change my name to Gertrude, and become a goat farmer. I tiptoed to the massive double doors. Locked, of course. I turned to the balcony. Heavy glass doors led out to a stone terrace. I pushed them open, the morning air biting at my exposed skin. I looked down. It was a 4-story drop to the royal gardens. For a normal person, this was a death wish. For a royal scout who regularly climbed redwoods to track mountain lions, it was a Tuesday. "Okay, Rudina," I muttered, hiking up the heavy skirts of my dress and tying the fabric in a knot around my thighs. "You survived the Blood Moon skirmish. You can survive a walk of shame down a trellis." I swung my legs over the stone railing. The ivy was thick and ancient, offering solid handholds. I descended with practiced ease, my muscles moving on autopilot despite the hangover. Hand, foot, hand, foot. I was a ghost. I was a shadow. I was halfway down when I spotted the lush grass of the private garden below. Freedom. I timed my drop, letting go of the ivy 10 feet from the ground and landing in a perfect crouch, absorbing the impact silently. I exhaled, brushing a leaf out of my hair. 10 out of 10 for form. A deep baritone voice rumbled from the shadows of a willow tree. But the dismount was a little sloppy. I froze, slowly, painfully. I turned my head. King Baldulf was leaning against the tree trunk, arms crossed over his massive chest. He wasn't wearing his formal suit anymore. He was in a black t-shirt that strained against his shoulders and loose tactical pants. He looked less like a monarch and more like a weapon of mass destruction at rest. And he was watching me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. "Your Majesty," I squeaked, straightening up and trying to look dignified despite the knotted dress and the bedhead. "I was just testing the perimeter security. Found a hole. You're welcome." He pushed off the tree, taking a slow, predatory step toward me. "Is that so? And here I thought you were trying to run away from me." "Run? Never," I lied, backing up until my heels hit the stone wall. "I just prefer the scenic route." He stopped inches from me. He didn't smell like alcohol anymore. He smelled like pure, overwhelming power. "You can't run from this, Rudina. The bond doesn't have an off switch." Chapter 3. The bond is a biological chemical reaction, I snapped, my anxiety suddenly morphing into defensiveness. Being cornered usually did that to me. It can be triggered by stress, adrenaline, or, in my case, an obscene amount of sugary wine. It's a glitch. Baldulf stared at me, his expression unreadable. Most people cowered when the king stared. I just felt the urge to organize his bookshelf or run away. Preferably, run away. A glitch, he repeated, the word rolling around his mouth like he was tasting it. You think my wolf claiming you in front of the entire aristocracy was a glitch? Yes, I insisted, crossing my arms. I am a scout, Your Majesty. I spend my life covered in mud, sleeping in ditches, and eating questionable jerky. You are, well, you're the king. You need a queen who knows which fork to use for the salad. I used a dessert spoon for soup last night. I am a diplomatic incident waiting to happen. I took a breath, trying to summon my professional voice. I respectfully request to be released from the palace grounds to resume my duties. My squad is scheduled for a perimeter patrol in the North Woods tomorrow. Denied, he said simply. Excuse me? You aren't going to the North Woods, Baldulf said, his voice dropping an octave. You aren't going on patrol. You aren't going anywhere where I can't reach you in 3 seconds or less. You can't ground me. I'm 24 years old and a lieutenant in your army. I am not grounding you, Rudina. I am keeping you alive. He stepped closer, invading my personal space until I had to tilt my head back to look him in the eye. You have no idea what you did last night. You didn't just sit on my lap. You woke something up that I have spent 20 years trying to sedate. His eyes flashed gold again, the iris swirling like liquid metal. If you leave these grounds, I cannot guarantee the safety of anyone who tries to stop me from coming to get you. Do you understand? I will burn this kingdom down to find you. The threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. But it wasn't spoken with malice. It was spoken with a terrifying factual certainty. He wasn't threatening to hurt me, he was threatening to destroy the world if he lost me. So I'm a prisoner, I whispered. No, he said, reaching out. His fingers hovered over my cheek for a second, trembling slightly before he pulled back as if afraid he would break me. You are the queen, but you are inside the gates, permanently. He turned and walked back toward the palace doors, throwing a command over his shoulder. Breakfast is in 10 minutes. Don't make me come fetch you. I might not let you go a second time. I watched him walk away, fury and fear warring in my gut. He thought he could cage me. He thought because he was the Alpha King, I would just sit on a cushion and embroider handkerchiefs. I looked at the high stone walls surrounding the garden. I was a tracker. I was a scout. I didn't get caught. I got gone. But first, I needed coffee. And then I needed a plan. Chapter 4. 72 hours. I had been stuck in the Obsidian Palace for 72 hours, and I was officially climbing the walls. Literally. I had scaled the library bookshelves twice just to see if the dust on the top shelf needed cleaning. It did. Baldulf was true to his word. He didn't lock me in a room, but the palace guards were everywhere. They were polite, they bowed, and they absolutely refused to let me within 10 feet of the main gate. The king himself was a ghost. I saw him at dinner, where he watched me eat with that intense, unnerving focus, but he rarely spoke. He just existed near me, like a silent, brooding statue that occasionally passed me the salt. My muscles were twitching from lack of use. I needed to hit something. I wandered out to the training yards on the 4th morning. The Royal Guard was running drills. These weren't scouts. These were the palace elite. Big, bulky men who focused on brute strength and formation. They looked like moving boulders. I leaned against the fence, watching the captain of the guard, a man named Drax who had a neck the size of a tree stump, berating a rookie. You move like a pregnant cow, Drax roared, backhanding the rookie's training sword away. Again, use your weight. He's using too much weight, I said loudly. The training yard went silent. Drax turned slowly, his eyes narrowing as he spotted me. Lady Rudina, I wasn't aware the king allowed you out of the nursery. A ripple of laughter went through the guards. I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile I used right before I led a rogue wolf into a bear trap. I hopped over the fence, landing softly in the dust. I was wearing borrowed training leathers that were a little tight in the chest but allowed me to move. "The king doesn't keep me anywhere, Captain," I said, walking to the weapon rack and picking up a wooden training staff. It was balanced poorly, but it would do. "And your rookie is losing because he's telegraphing his swings. He steps heavy on his left foot before he strikes." Drax snorted, stepping forward. He towered over me by at least a foot. "Is that so? And I suppose a little scout knows better than the captain of the elite?" "Scouts survive in the wild, Drax. You survive in a heated palace." I spun the staff in my hand, feeling the familiar weight settle my anxiety. "Care to test the theory?" "I don't fight mates," Drax sneered. "I don't want to break the king's favorite toy." "I'm not a toy," I said, my voice dropping. "And if you can land a hit on me, I'll clean the barracks latrines for a month." Drax grinned, raising his massive broadsword. "You're on, little girl." He lunged. It was a powerful strike, meant to end the fight in one blow. But he was slow, painfully, hilariously slow. I didn't block it. I stepped inside his guard. I hooked my foot behind his ankle and slammed the butt of my staff into his solar plexus. Momentum did the rest. The massive captain of the guard tripped over his own feet and slammed face first into the dirt with a thud that shook the ground. I stood over him, resting the staff on his shoulder. "Dead," I said cheerfully. "Next?" The yard was dead silent. I looked up to the balcony overlooking the yard, sensing eyes on me. Baldulf was there. He was gripping the stone railing so hard the rock was cracking under his fingers. But he didn't look angry that I had humiliated his captain. His nostrils were flared, his chest heaving. He looked at me like I wasn't just a mate anymore. He looked at me like I was the most fascinating, dangerous thing he had ever seen. And worse, he looked like he wanted to jump down there and finish the fight himself. Chapter 5. The moon was high, full, and calling to me like a bad influence. I stood at the edge of the royal gardens, staring at the 10-foot stone wall that separated the manicured prison of the palace from the wild, unkempt freedom of the forest beyond. My skin felt too tight. My bones ached with a static electricity that had been building since I humiliated Captain Drax in the dirt earlier that day. The king's gaze from the balcony hadn't just been pride. It had been a challenge. "Run," my wolf whispered. "Let's see if he can keep up." I didn't bother with the gate. I stripped out of the training leathers, kicking them into a bush, royal laundry staff, and let the shift take me. It was a familiar, cracking relief. Bones reshaped, fur sprouted, and senses exploded into high definition. I was no longer Rudina, the awkward girl who tripped over carpets. I was a silver-gray timber wolf, built for endurance and speed. I didn't hesitate. I sprinted toward the wall, scrabbling up the rough stone with claws designed for granite cliffs, and vaulted over the top. Freedom. The forest air hit me like a drug. Pine, damp earth, and decaying leaves. I hit the ground running, my paws tearing up the moss as I stretched into a full gallop. I was fast. Among the scouts, I was the fastest. I banked off a tree trunk, dodging a low-hanging branch, exhilaration pumping through my veins. Then, the ground shook. It wasn't an earthquake. It was a predator. A massive shadow detached itself from the tree line behind me. It wasn't a normal wolf. It was a midnight black monstrosity, standing nearly 5 feet tall at the shoulder, with eyes that burned like molten gold. Baldulf. He wasn't just an alpha, he was a lichen. Ancient, terrifying, and currently gaining on me with impossible speed. "Oh, you have got to be kidding me," I thought, pushing my legs harder. I zagged left through a dense thicket of thorns. He smashed through them like they were wet tissue paper. I scrambled up a rocky embankment, using my lighter weight to navigate the loose shale. He cleared the entire slope in 2 bounds. It wasn't a hunt. It was a game of tag. And I was it. Panic flared, but it was quickly smothered by a strange bubbling laughter in my chest. He wasn't attacking. He was hurting me. He cut off my exit to the north, forcing me toward the river. I feinted right, then spun left. A classic scout maneuver. But he was already there, a wall of black fur and muscle. I skidded to a halt, baring my teeth in a playful snarl. He didn't stop. He tackled me. We rolled through a pile of autumn leaves, a tangle of limbs and fur. He pinned me effortlessly, his massive weight holding me down without crushing me. His jaws, powerful enough to snap a femur, closed gently around the scruff of my neck. Gotcha. The telepathic impression slammed into my mind, deep and smug. I stopped struggling, panting beneath him. I looked up into those gold eyes and realized with a jolt of horror that I wasn't scared. I was having fun. Chapter 6. The transition back to human skin was always undignified, leaving you naked, shivering, and covered in dirt. Or, in my case, leaves. We were back in the king's private suite. Baldulf had carried me back over the wall, show off, and deposited me onto the balcony before shifting back himself. Now he was pulling a throw blanket off the sofa and wrapping it around my shoulders, his chest heaving slightly from the run. It was unfair that he looked like a Greek god after a 5-mile sprint, while I looked like I'd lost a fight with a hedge trimmer. "You're fast," he said, his voice rough, vibrating with the remnants of the wolf. "For a scout." "You cheated," I gasped, clutching the blanket tight. "You have legs the size of tree trunks. That was physically unfair. I demand a handicap next time." "Next time?" He stepped closer, crowding me against the glass doors. The heat radiating off him was intoxicating. "So you admit there will be a next time? You aren't going to try to escape the kingdom?" "I wasn't escaping," I lied, though my pulse was hammering in my throat for an entirely different reason now. "I was patrolling, checking for structural weaknesses in the perimeter wall. And I found one. It's easily vaulted by a determined timber wolf." Baldulf braced his hands on the glass on either side of my head, trapping me. He smelled of pine needles and musk, a scent that made my knees unacceptably weak. "I don't want to cage you, Rudina, but I can't let you vanish into the woods for weeks at a time. The bond, it physically hurts when you are too far away." I looked up at him, seeing the raw honesty in his eyes. He wasn't a tyrant. He was desperate. "I can't be a doll, Baldulf," I said softly. "I can't sit around eating bonbons and planning galas. I need to work. I need to be useful. If you cage me, I will wither." He stared at me for a long moment, the gears turning behind that stoic expression. "Fine. A compromise." "I'm listening." "You remain the head scout," he said, and my heart soared. "But you do not go on solo missions. You take a squad of elite guards with you, and you handle the logistics and planning from the war room, not just the field." "Deal," I said quickly before he could change his mind. "I have one more condition," he added, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous purr. "Which is?" "You sleep here." He gestured to the massive bed that dominated the room. "Every night in my bed, where I can smell you and hear your heart beating." My face flushed hot. "That is highly improper. The council will have a stroke." "Let them stroke out," Baldulf murmured, leaning down until his nose brushed against my neck, inhaling deeply. "I don't care about propriety, I care about sanity, and I don't think I can sleep without you now." I swallowed hard, my hands trembling where they clutched the blanket. I should say no. I should argue. But the truth was, the thought of sleeping alone in the guest quarters suddenly felt very cold. "Fine," I whispered. "But you stay on your side. No cuddling. I kick in my sleep." Baldulf pulled back, a dark, wicked smirk curling his lips. "We'll see about that." Chapter 7. The council chamber was designed to be intimidating. It was all black stone, high ceilings, and old men with beards that smelled like mothballs and judgment. I sat to the right of Baldulf's throne, wearing a stiff, high-collared dress that scratched my neck. I tried to look regal. I mostly felt like a child wearing her mother's clothes. Baldulf sat on his throne like a statue carved from obsidian, his face an unreadable mask of boredom and menace. Lord Malcor, the head elder, was droning on about grain shipments. He was a weaselly man who clearly thought his opinion was the only one that mattered. And therefore, Your Majesty, Malcor said, sniffing disdainfully. We must divert the supply lines through the southern pass. The northern route is too treacherous this time of year. He glanced at me, his lip curling. Not that the Lady Rudina would understand the complexities of supply chain management. Perhaps she would be more comfortable in the gardens. The insult landed with a wet thud. The other elders chuckled softly. Baldulf didn't move. He didn't blink. But I felt the air pressure in the room drop. He was waiting. He was letting them hang themselves. I cleared my throat. Actually, Lord Malcor? I said, my voice cutting through the chuckles. If you route the grain through the southern pass, you'll lose 30% of the shipment to the mudslides that happen every year after the first thaw. I know this because I spent 3 weeks digging a cart out of that mud last spring. Malcor blinked, stunned that the furniture was speaking. I beg your pardon? Furthermore, I continued, leaning forward and resting my elbows on the polished table. The northern route isn't treacherous if you use the old logging roads past the ridge. The ground is shale, not dirt. It drains well. You can cut travel time by 2 days and save the cost of wheel repairs. I looked around the table, meeting every pair of eyes. I've mapped those woods myself. I know every rock, every route, and every shortcut. If you want the grain to arrive before it rots, you'll listen to the scout, not the mapmaker who hasn't left the capital in 20 years. Silence stretched across the room. It was thick and heavy. Malcor's face turned a delightful shade of puce. She has a point, another elder mumbled, looking at his notes. Baldulf shifted in his throne. He didn't smile. Kings didn't smile at logistics. But his eyes were dancing. Slowly, deliberately, he reached under the heavy oak table. His large, warm hand found my knee. He didn't just rest it there. He squeezed, his thumb dragging agonizingly slow circles against the sensitive skin of my inner thigh. I nearly choked on air. The Lady Rudina is correct, Baldulf said, his voice smooth and dark. We will use the northern route. Proceed. He leaned slightly toward me, his lips barely moving as he whispered, so low only I could hear. Do that again. Put them in their place. It is incredibly arousing. I stared straight ahead, my face burning, trying desperately to pay attention to the tax report, while the king's hand moved higher up my leg. Chapter 8. I woke up because the air tasted like ozone. It was the middle of the night. The room was pitch black, but the smell of burning electricity was thick enough to choke on. A low, pained groan came from the other side of the bed. Baldulf? I whispered, reaching out. The sheets were soaked with sweat. His skin, when my fingers brushed his shoulder, was scorching hot. Not fever hot, oven hot. Don't touch me, he gasped, his voice ragged and broken. Rudina, get out of the room. I scrambled up, fumbling for the bedside lamp. The light flickered on, and I gasped. Baldulf was curled on his side, his muscles locked rigid. Veins of glowing gold light were pulsing under his skin, looking like molten lava trying to break through granite. The stone floor beneath the bed was cracking, hairline fractures spreading outward from where he lay. The air around him shimmered with raw, uncontrolled magic. What is this? I cried, hovering over him, terrified. Alpha burn, he gritted out through clenched teeth. Too much power. Can't contain it. Run, Rudina. If I lose control, I will level this wing of the palace. He convulsed, a scream tearing from his throat. The windows rattled in their frames. A glass vase on the mantelpiece shattered. He was a nuclear reactor going into meltdown. And he was trying to send me away to save me. I looked at the door. I could run. I should run. My survival instincts were screaming at me to flee the blast zone. No, I wasn't just a scout anymore. I was his mate. And I remembered the chair. I remembered how he had calmed down the moment he touched me. I'm not leaving, I said, my voice shaking, but firm. Rudina, please. I climbed onto the bed. The heat coming off him was intense, stinging my skin, but I ignored it. I crawled over to him and wrapped my arms around his shoulders, pulling his heavy, burning body against my chest. "Let it go," I whispered into his ear, threading my fingers through his sweat-drenched hair. "I've got you. I'm right here. Ground yourself on me." Baldulf stiffened, a roar building in his chest. For a second, I thought I'd made a fatal mistake. I thought he was going to incinerate me. But then, the magic shifted. Instead of exploding outward, it rushed toward me. It slammed into my body, a wave of pure golden energy. It didn't hurt. It felt right, like a puzzle piece snapping into place. I absorbed the excess power, my own wolf rising up to meet it, drinking it in. The glowing veins under his skin began to fade. The cracking of the floor stopped. The heat dissipated, leaving only the warmth of a man. Baldulf slumped against me, his breathing ragged, his weight heavy. He buried his face in the crook of my neck, his arms coming up to crush me against him in a desperate embrace. "The silence," he murmured, his voice thick with exhaustion and awe. "The noise. It stopped. You stopped it." I held him tight, rocking him gently as the last of the tremors left his body. I realized then that the High Council was wrong. He wasn't a monster. He was a man holding up the sky, and he had finally found someone to help him carry the weight. "I'm here," I whispered, kissing his damp temple. "I'm not going anywhere." But as I held him, a cold thought settled in my stomach. If the council knew he was this vulnerable, if they knew I was the only thing keeping the king from going feral, they wouldn't just insult me, they would try to kill me. Chapter 9. Silence was heavy. Usually, silence felt empty, like a room after a party ended. But this silence was full. It was physical. It wrapped around us like a blanket, shielding us from the chaos of the world outside the heavy oak door. I was still straddling Baldulf on the mattress, my arms locked around his neck, his face buried in the crook of my shoulder. The terrible heat that had radiated from him moments ago had cooled to a comfortable, steady warmth. The glowing veins beneath his skin had faded back to olive and tan. "You're heavy," I whispered, though I made no move to push him off. Baldulf pulled back slowly. He looked wrecked. His hair was damp with sweat sticking to his forehead, and his eyes, usually so guarded and cold, were wide and vulnerable. He looked at me like I was a puzzle he had finally solved after 20 years of frustration. "The noise," he rasped, his voice raw. "It stopped." "What noise?" I reached up, instinctively brushing a stray lock of hair from his temple. He leaned into my touch, closing his eyes. "Everything. Everyone. My power. It acts like a receiver. I feel the pack's emotions, their fears, their greed, their hunger. It's a constant, screaming static in the back of my skull. It's why I don't speak. Speaking opens the floodgates." He opened his eyes, staring right into my soul. "But when you touch me, it's quiet. It's just you. You are the only thing that is silent." My heart did a traitorous little flip in my chest. "So, I'm a mute button? That's romantic." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. It was the first time I had ever seen him genuinely smile, and it transformed his face from terrifying to devastatingly handsome. "You are not a button, Rudina. You are an anchor. You ground the excess energy before it burns me alive." He shifted his grip, his large hands sliding up my spine to cup my face. The air between us grew thick again, but this time it wasn't magic. It was tension. The good kind. The kind that made my toes curl. "I thought I would go mad," he confessed, his thumb tracing my lower lip. "I thought the alpha burn would eventually turn me feral, and I'd have to be put down by my own guards. And then, you sat on my lap." "I thought you were a chair," I reminded him breathlessly. "Best mistake of my life," he murmured. He didn't give me time to come up with a witty retort. He closed the distance, his lips crashing onto mine. It wasn't a tentative first kiss, it was hungry. It was possessive. It tasted like ozone and desperation. I melted against him, my fingers tangling in his hair, pulling him closer. For a man who had been silent for a decade, he certainly knew how to communicate. When we finally broke apart, gasping for air, he rested his forehead against mine. "You stay," he commanded softly. "You stay right here. Always." It wasn't a request, but for the first time, it didn't feel like a cage. It felt like a promise. Chapter 10. The problem with happiness is that it makes you complacent. And in a palace full of vipers, complacency gets you killed. 2 days had passed since the incident. Baldulf was different. He was still the Stone King in public, but the edge of madness was gone. He stood straighter. He looked people in the eye. He even told a joke at breakfast, though it was a very dry, political joke that only I laughed at. I, however, was still a scout, and scouts didn't do well with idleness. While Baldulf was in a closed-door meeting with the treasury, I decided to explore the servant tunnels. The palace was a honeycomb of hidden passages designed for maids to move unseen, but to me, they were a tactical playground. I moved silently through the narrow stone corridor behind the council chamber, enjoying the dust and the dark. I paused near a ventilation grate. Voices drifted up from the room below. "Can't touch him now," a scratchy voice hissed. I recognized it instantly. Lord Malcor. "He's too stable. The girl has grounded him. His power is controlled. If we move against the king now, he'll slaughter us all." I froze, holding my breath. I pressed my ear against the cold stone. "Then we remove the stabilizer," a second voice said. It was deep, unfamiliar, a mercenary's voice. "We kill the girl." My blood turned to ice. "We can't just slit her throat in the hallway," Malcor snapped. "The mating bond is fresh. If she dies violently, the king will go insane. He'll burn the capital to the ground in his grief." "So we make it an accident," the mercenary replied. "The annual hunt is in 3 days. The woods are dangerous. Stray arrows happen. Rock slides happen. If she dies in the wild, well, it's a tragedy, not a coup." "Yes," Malcor mused, the sound of parchment shuffling echoing through the grate. "A hunting accident. The king returns to his grief, the madness returns, and we resume control of the council. Make sure it's clean. I don't want any evidence left behind. Consider it done." I backed away from the grate slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. They weren't trying to kill Baldulf. They were trying to break him. And I was the hammer they were going to use. I turned and ran. I didn't run to Baldulf. Not yet. If I told him now, he would storm the council chamber and rip Malcor's head off. And without proof, the other elders would call it tyranny. They would start a civil war. No, I was a scout. I didn't panic. I planned. Chapter 11. The royal armory smelled of oil, steel, and leather. My favorite perfume. Baldulf was waiting for me by the weapon racks. He looked sickeningly proud of himself. When I walked in, trying to keep my face neutral and my hands from shaking, he gestured to a mannequin in the center of the room. "I had the royal tailors collaborate with the armor smiths," he said, watching my reaction closely. It wasn't a dress. It was a suit of armor designed for a woman who intended to kill things. The chest piece was hardened leather dyed a deep midnight blue, reinforced with steel plating over the vitals. The pauldrons were articulated for movement. The pants were flexible, lined with Kevlar weave, tucked into boots that had hidden knife sheaths. It was beautiful. It was lethal. "You hate the dresses," Baldulf said, stepping up behind me and wrapping his arms around my waist. "I can smell your annoyance every time you put one on. This is for the hunt. I want you to be you." I touched the cold steel of the breastplate. He accepted me. He didn't want a queen who sat on a throne. He wanted the scout who climbed walls. Tears pricked my eyes, hot and sudden. "It's perfect," I whispered. "I also took the liberty of sharpening your knives," he murmured into my hair. "Though I pity the stag that crosses your path." He was so happy. He was so calm. If I told him about Malcor's plot now, this peace would shatter. He would lock me in the tower for my own safety, and Malcor would just find another way. The only way to stop a predator was to let it spring the trap and then bite back. "Baldulf," I said, turning in his arms. "I love it." He kissed me, soft and lingering. "I love you." The words hit me hard. He hadn't said them before. Later, as I was changing into the armor to test the fit, I found a scrap of paper tucked into the lining of the gauntlet. It wasn't from Baldulf. The handwriting was jagged and hurried. "Run while you can, little scout. The woods have eyes." I stared at the note. It was a warning. Someone in the castle had a conscience, or maybe they just wanted to scare me. I crumpled the paper in my fist. I walked over to the brazier burning in the corner and tossed it into the flames, watching it curl into ash. I wasn't running. I was going hunting. Chapter 12. The morning of the royal hunt dawned gray and cold. Mist clung to the trees of the Blackwood Forest, turning the world into a ghost story. The hunting party was massive, 50 guards, 20 nobles, and the king's entourage. I rode a black mare beside Baldulf wearing my new armor. Malcor was there, riding a white gelding, looking pious and innocent. He nodded to me as we gathered at the tree line. I smiled back. I hoped he choked on it. "Stay close," Baldulf murmured, checking the girth of his saddle. He was tense. His alpha instincts were prickling, sensing the danger without knowing the source. "I don't like the smell of the air today." "I'll be right beside you," I lied. The horn blew, a deep, mournful sound that signaled the start of the hunt. We thundered into the trees. The plan was to track a massive elk that had been spotted near the ridge, but chaos descended quickly. 20 minutes in, a shout went up from the left flank. "Wolf! Rogue wolf!" The guards scattered, chasing the distraction. Baldulf roared an order to hold formation, but the excitement of the chase broke the discipline. We were pushed toward a narrow canyon path, the northern route I had argued for in the council meeting. "Rudina, pull back," Baldulf shouted, wrestling his massive stallion as it reared. I tried to turn my mare, but a guard, one of the faces I didn't recognize, slapped her flank hard. She bolted. She tore down the rocky path, carrying me away from the king. "Rudina!" Baldulf's roar shook the trees. I sawed at the reins, bringing the mare to a skidding halt deeper in the ravine. I spun her around to go back, but a rumble from above stopped me cold. I looked up. High on the canyon wall, 2 figures in dark cloaks were pushing against a massive boulder. It tipped. Gravity took over. Tons of granite crashed down onto the path, sealing the entrance to the ravine with a deafening boom. Dust billowed up, choking the air. I coughed, waving my hand in front of my face. "Baldulf!" I screamed. Silence answered me. The rock slide was 20 feet high. I was cut off. I was isolated. And I was exactly where they wanted me. I slid off my horse, drawing the twin hunting knives from my boots. The mist swirled around me, thick and unnatural. "All right," I whispered to the empty woods, my heart pounding a war drum against my ribs. "You wanted an accident? Come and get it." Chapter 13. The dust from the rockslide tasted like chalk and bad intentions. It settled slowly, coating my tongue and stinging my eyes. But I didn't blink. I couldn't afford to. The ravine was a geological dead end. Steep walls on both sides, a pile of granite blocking the retreat, and a thick, unnatural mist curling around the path ahead. My mare, a skittish creature named Shadow, imaginative, I know, danced nervously beneath me, her ears pinned back. She smelled them before I did. "Easy, girl," I murmured, sliding my feet out of the stirrups. If things went south, I didn't want to be attached to 1,200 pounds of panic. The mist parted. 5 men stepped out from behind the scrub brush. They weren't wearing the royal crest. They were dressed in mismatched leathers and heavy cloaks, the universal uniform for generic hired thug. They held crossbows leveled at my chest. The leader, a man with a scar running through his left eyebrow and a nose that had been broken at least 3 times, stepped forward. He smirked. It was a practiced smirk, the kind you rehearse in a mirror before committing a felony. "Tragic," the leader said, his voice grating like gravel. "Rock slides are so unpredictable this time of year. A terrible accident for the king's new pet." I sighed, swinging my leg over the saddle and dropping to the ground. I patted Shadow's flank, silently signaling her to run back toward the rubble. She didn't need to be told twice. She bolted, leaving me standing alone in the clearing. "I have a question," I said, my voice conversational, echoing slightly off the canyon walls. "Did Lord Malcor write that dialogue for you, or did you come up with it yourself? Because it's a little cliché. Tragic accident? You couldn't weave in something about a rogue bear or a lightning strike?" The leader's smirk faltered. "You talk a lot for a dead girl." "And you stand very close together for people facing a royal scout," I countered, resting my hand on the hilt of my left dagger. "I assume you're the cleanup crew. No witnesses. Make it look like nature took its course?" "Something like that," he grunted, raising his hand. The 4 men behind him tightened their fingers on their triggers. "Don't worry, Your Highness. We'll make it quick." I looked at the crossbows. Heavy draw weight, steel tips, overkill for a girl in a dress, but appropriate for the armor Baldulf had given me. They hadn't expected the armor. I saw their eyes flick to the hardened leather breastplate, calculating the penetration depth. "Here's the problem with your plan," I said, taking a casual step back, my boot finding a loose root. "You blocked the exit, which means I can't get out." I paused, letting a cold, wolfish grin spread across my face. "But it also means you can't get out." The leader frowned. "Fire!" 4 crossbow strings snapped. The bolts whistled through the air. But I wasn't there anymore. I had dropped, sliding underneath the mist layer, rolling toward the cover of a fallen log. The bolts slammed into the dirt where I had been standing a second ago. "My turn," I whispered. Chapter 14. I didn't just roll, I moved. The moment I hit the cover of the log, I reached into my belt pouch and pulled out a smoke pellet. Standard issue for deep wood tracking, usually used to signal aircraft, but excellent for blinding idiots. I slammed it against the rock. A cloud of thick purple smoke exploded outward, engulfing the clearing. "Hold fire! I can't see her!" one of the thugs screamed. "Rookie mistake," I muttered. I didn't need to see. I could smell them. The unwashed leather, the cheap ale, the spike of cortisol in their sweat. I shifted my grip on my daggers and dove into the smoke. I stayed low, attacking the knees. I wasn't looking to kill. Baldulf would want to interrogate them, but I certainly wasn't looking to be gentle. I swept the legs of the first man I found. He went down with a grunt. Before he could scramble up, I drove the pommel of my dagger into his temple. He went limp. 1 down. "Spread out," the leader roared. "She's just a girl." "I'm a scout, you turnip," I yelled back, throwing my voice to the left. 2 bolts fired at the sound. I moved right, flanking them. I jumped onto the back of the second mercenary, wrapping my legs around his torso. He thrashed, trying to throw me off, but I jammed my arm under his chin in a sleeper hold. "Nap time," I whispered. He slumped to the ground 3 seconds later. 2 down. The smoke was clearing. The remaining 3 men were panicked now. They dropped their crossbows and drew swords. Bad move. Crossbows gave them range, swords required them to get close to me, and nobody got close to a pissed-off wolf unless they wanted to lose fingers. I dodged a clumsy swing from the 3rd man, ducking under the blade. As I came up, I slashed his wrist. Shallow, just enough to make him drop the weapon. He howled, clutching his hand. I spun and kicked him squarely in the chest, sending him flying back into the 4th man. They tangled in a heap of limbs and curses. I didn't waste time. I grabbed a fist-sized rock and, well, let's just say they wouldn't be waking up for a few hours. 4 down. A sharp, burning pain suddenly flared in my left shoulder. I gasped, stumbling forward. The leader. He hadn't drawn a sword. He had reloaded his crossbow. I looked down. A bolt was sticking out of my pauldron. The steel plating had stopped it from piercing my heart, but the impact had driven the tip through the leather and into the muscle of my shoulder. My arm went numb. "Armor!" The leader spat, stepping out of the thinning mist. He aimed the crossbow at my head this time. "Clever, but you're bleeding, little queen, and you're out of tricks." I dropped to one knee, clutching my shoulder. The pain was white-hot, dizzying. I looked up at him, breathing hard. "You're right," I wheezed. "I am out of tricks." He squeezed the trigger. I didn't dodge. I didn't have to. I threw my throwing knife. The metallic twang of his crossbow firing happened at the exact same second my knife buried itself in his shoulder. His aim jerked. The bolt whizzed past my ear, shearing off a lock of my hair. The leader dropped the bow, screaming, and fell to his knees. I stood up, ignoring the screaming agony in my shoulder. I walked over to him, kicked the knife away, and placed the tip of my boot on his chest. "I lied," I said, looking down at him. "I have one more trick. It's called buying time for the Alpha." As if on cue, the pile of rocks blocking the ravine exploded. Chapter 15. The sound wasn't an explosion. It was an eradication. The 20-foot wall of granite that had trapped us didn't just crumble. It burst outward as if hit by a siege engine. Boulders the size of carriages were tossed aside like pebbles. Dust billowed up again, but this time, it was cleared instantly by a roar that shook the marrow in my bones. Baldulf. He didn't come through as a man. He came through as a nightmare. He was in his hybrid form, 7 feet of lethal, shifting shadow, claws capable of shredding steel, and eyes that were 2 burning pits of hellfire. He tore into the clearing, his head snapping side to side. He was looking for a body. He was looking for my corpse. The scent of my blood, sharp and metallic from the wound in my shoulder, hit him, and he went absolutely terrifyingly still. The mercenary leader under my boot stopped screaming. He stopped breathing. He stared at the monster in the mist and whimpered, a tiny, pathetic sound. Baldulf spotted us. His gaze locked onto the arrow sticking out of my shoulder. The growl that tore out of him wasn't human. It wasn't wolf. It was the sound of a tectonic plate snapping. He crossed the distance in a blur of motion, moving so fast my eyes couldn't track him. "Baldulf, stop!" I shouted, holding up my good hand. He skidded to a halt inches from me, his claws digging deep furrows into the hard earth. His chest was heaving, his muzzle pulled back in a snarl that exposed teeth meant for tearing throats. He was vibrating with the need to kill. He looked at the mercenary, and I saw the man's soul leave his body out of pure terror. "He's mine," Baldulf snarled, his voice a distorted, grinding rasp. "I will peel the skin from his bones." "No!" I stepped between them. It was the stupidest thing I had ever done. Standing between a feral alpha and his prey is a great way to get killed. But I needed this man alive. Baldulf flinched, his claws freezing inches from my face. He looked down at me, his eyes wild, pupilless gold. "Look at me," I commanded, forcing my voice to be steady despite the pain in my shoulder. "Baldulf, look at me." He blinked, the feral haze clearing just a fraction. He focused on my face, then on the arrow. He made a wounded noise, reaching out with a trembling hand to hover over the injury. "You're bleeding," he whispered, the monster's voice cracking into something human. "They hurt you." "I'm fine, it stopped at the bone," I said, wincing as I straightened up. "But this one, this is the witness. He knows who paid them. If you kill him now, we lose the council." Baldulf looked at the mercenary, then back at me. The rage was still there, simmering like a volcano, but the logic was returning. The strategist was waking up. "He lives," Baldulf growled, the decision costing him visible effort. "For now." He reached out, grabbing the mercenary leader by the throat and lifting him one-handed off the ground like a rag doll. The man gurgled, feet kicking uselessly. Baldulf threw him toward the approaching guards who were scrambling over the debris. "Take him," Baldulf commanded the guards. "If he dies before he speaks, I will execute every single one of you." Then he turned back to me. The monster receded, shifting back into the man. The terrified, furious man. He scooped me up into his arms, mindful of the arrow, pulling me against his chest as if he was trying to merge our skeletons. "You're late," I mumbled into his tunic, the adrenaline finally crashing. "I will burn the world for this," he vowed into my hair, his heart hammering against my ear like a trapped bird. "I will burn it all." "Later," I sighed, closing my eyes. "Right now, I think I need a doctor, and maybe a new dress. This armor is ruined." Chapter 16. The doors to the grand throne room didn't open. They were kicked open. The sound echoed like a gunshot through the cavernous hall, silencing the murmurs of the gathered court. 300 nobles turned in unison, their champagne flutes freezing halfway to their lips. They were expecting a toast to the success of the hunt. Instead, they got a horror show. Baldulf walked in first. He was back in his human form, but only just. He was covered in dirt, stone dust, and the blood of the men who had tried to kill me. He didn't look like a king. He looked like the Grim Reaper having a very bad day. And then there was me. I walked beside him, not behind him. My armor was battered. My hair was a bird's nest of twigs and debris, and a makeshift bandage was wrapped tightly around my shoulder. I looked like I had wrestled a mountain and lost, but I was standing. "Your Majesty!" Lord Malcor hurried forward from the foot of the dais, his white robes pristine, a look of practiced concern plastered onto his face. "We heard rumors of a rockslide, a tragedy. Is the Lady Rudina?" He stopped. He saw me. The color drained from his face so fast I thought he might faint. "The Lady Rudina," Baldulf said, his voice a low, vibrating rumble that shook the stained glass windows, "is inconveniently alive." Baldulf didn't stop walking until we reached the center of the room. He didn't ascend the throne. He stood on the floor, on the same level as the court, like a predator stalking a herd. "A rock slide," Baldulf repeated, turning slowly to face the trembling assembly. "A tragic accident. That was the narrative, wasn't it, Malcor?" I don't know what you mean, sire," Malcor stammered, his eyes darting to the exits. "Nature is unpredictable." "Bring him in," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but in the terrified silence of the room, it carried perfectly. 2 royal guards dragged the mercenary leader into the hall. He was battered, bruised, and terrified. He took one look at Baldulf and fell to his knees, sobbing. "He hired me!" the mercenary screamed, pointing a shaking finger directly at Malcor. "Lord Malcor, he paid in gold. He said make it look like an accident. He said the king was weak." The gasp that went through the room sucked all the oxygen out of the air. Malcor sputtered, backing away. "Lies! The man is a criminal. He's trying to save his own skin." Baldulf moved. It was a blur of motion. One second he was standing beside me. The next, he had Malcor by the throat, lifting the elderly wolf off the ground with one hand. Malcor's feet kicked uselessly in the air. "Weak," Baldulf whispered, tilting his head. "You thought I was weak because I chose peace. You thought because I did not speak, I did not see." His eyes flared gold. The air in the room grew heavy, the static charge of the alpha burn crackling against everyone's skin. But this time I didn't reach out to stop it. I let him burn. "I am not weak, Malcor," Baldulf snarled. "I was merely holding back, and you just gave me a reason to stop." "Baldulf," I said calmly. He froze, his claws digging into Malcor's expensive silk collar. He looked back at me, the gold in his eyes swirling. "Don't kill him," I said. Malcor wheezed, hope flickering in his eyes. "Yes, listen to the girl." "He doesn't deserve the mercy of a quick death," I continued, stepping forward. "And if you kill him without a trial, you make him a martyr. Let him live in the rotting cells. Let him rot in the dark, knowing that his plan failed, knowing that I am still standing." I looked at the court, raising my chin. "Let everyone see that the king doesn't need to kill to rule, he just needs to snap his fingers." Baldulf stared at me for a long heartbeat. Then a dark, terrifying smile curled his lips. He dropped Malcor. The High Elder hit the floor in a heap, gasping for air. "Take him away," Baldulf commanded the guards, "and arrest the rest of the conspirators. I have the list." As the guards swarmed the room, arresting 3 other elders who had suddenly tried to blend into the curtains, the rest of the court dropped to their knees. It wasn't the forced submission of the Alpha Command. It was fear. It was respect. Baldulf turned to me, ignoring the chaos. He reached out, his thumb brushing a smudge of dirt from my cheek. "You should have let me eat him," he murmured. "Too much cholesterol," I replied, leaning into his touch. "Now, can we please go? I have a sudden, desperate need to not be wearing armor." Chapter 17. The royal physician was a nervous man with shaking hands, which wasn't ideal when he was stitching up a puncture wound in the shoulder of the queen, while the Alpha King loomed over him like a storm cloud. "If you hurt her," Baldulf growled for the 10th time, "I will remove your fingers." "He's doing fine, Baldulf," I sighed, wincing as the needle pulled tight. "Stop hovering. You're blocking the light." We were back in the king's suite. The adrenaline of the trial had worn off, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion. When the physician finally finished, bowed 3 times, and practically ran out of the room, silence settled over us. I sat on the edge of the massive bed, wearing one of Baldulf's silk shirts because I refused to put on a dress. Baldulf stood by the fireplace, staring into the flames. He had washed the blood off, but the tension was still coiled in his shoulders. "Come here," I said softly. He didn't move. "I almost lost you." "Almost doesn't count in horseshoes or hand grenades," I said. "I'm right here. I'm fine." "I couldn't feel you," he whispered, turning to face me. His expression broke my heart. The Stone King was gone. In his place was a man who looked shattered. When the rocks fell, the bond went silent. Just for a second. But in that second, I felt the end of the world. He walked toward me, dropping to his knees between my legs. He rested his head against my uninjured thigh, his arms wrapping around my waist. "I thought I broke you," he murmured into the fabric of the shirt. "I brought you into this cage. I made you a target. I told myself I was protecting you, but I almost got you killed." I ran my fingers through his damp hair, scratching lightly at his scalp the way I knew he liked. "Hey, look at me." He looked up, his golden eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "You didn't break me," I said fiercely. "You didn't cage me either. You gave me armor. You sharpened my knives. You let me be me. Any other alpha would have locked me in a tower the moment they saw the threat. You trusted me to fight." I leaned down, cupping his jaw. "I'm not a porcelain doll, Baldulf. I'm a scout. I choose my own path. And I choose this. I choose the danger. I choose the politics. And I choose you." "Why?" he asked, his voice cracking. "I am broken. I am dangerous." "Because," I smiled, leaning in until our lips were inches apart. "You're the most comfortable chair I've ever sat on." A startled laugh huffed out of his chest. "You are impossible." "I know. Kiss me." He didn't hesitate. He surged up, capturing my lips in a kiss that wasn't gentle. It was a reclaiming. It was fire and desperation and overwhelming love. He pushed me back onto the mattress, following me down, his weight a heavy, grounding comfort. There was no alpha burn tonight. There was no static. There was just him. His hands were everywhere, worshipping, possessive, marking every inch of skin as his territory. "I love you," he groaned against my neck, his teeth grazing the sensitive spot over my pulse. "I worship you. You command me, Rudina. You are the only one who ever has." "Then I command you," I breathless, pulling him closer, "to shut up and show me." And for the rest of the night, the Silent King was very, very thorough in his obedience. Chapter 18. 1 year later. The winter solstice ball had returned. The palace was decorated in silver and ice blue, the chandeliers sparkling like frozen tears. The music was sweeping and majestic, the food was exquisite, and I hated every single second of it. "Smile," Baldulf murmured in my ear, his hand resting possessively on the small of my back. "You look like you're plotting a murder." "I am," I whispered back, keeping my smile plastered on for the Duchess of Westfall. "My feet are killing me. These heels were designed by a torturer. I have a dagger strapped to my thigh and it's itching." Baldulf chuckled, the sound vibrating through his chest and into my side. He looked devastating in his formal black suit, the crown resting easily on his dark hair. He wasn't the Stone King anymore. He smiled. He spoke to his subjects. He was beloved, but he was still terrifyingly possessive. "Go," he whispered, kissing my temple. "Take a break, before you actually stab a duke." "You are the best husband," I said, picking up my skirts and fleeing the ballroom floor. I didn't go to the garden. It was too cold. I navigated the familiar hallways, dodging servants and drunk nobles, until I found it. The VIP alcove. It was exactly as I remembered it. Heavy crimson curtains, dim lighting, quiet. I slipped inside, exhaling a long breath of relief. I kicked off my heels, letting them thud onto the carpet. I reached down to adjust the dagger in my garter belt. Old habits died hard, and looked toward the corner. There was a velvet armchair there, but it was occupied. Baldulf was sitting there. He must have used the shadow paths to beat me here. He was lounging in the darkness, one leg crossed over the other, watching me with glowing, predatory eyes. "You followed me," I accused, though I wasn't angry. "I can't help it," he shrugged, his voice smooth as silk. "I have this addiction to trouble." I walked over to him. He didn't move. He didn't offer to stand up, he just watched me, that familiar hunger burning in his gaze. "Excuse me, sir," I said, stopping in front of him and placing my hands on my hips. "I believe you're in my seat." Baldulf smirked. He tapped his thigh. "There is plenty of room, although I must warn you, the cushioning is quite hard." I laughed, the sound bubbling up from my chest. "And the lumbar support?" "Terrible," he agreed. "But the stability is unmatched." I didn't hesitate. I stepped between his legs and sat on his lap, wrapping my arms around his neck. He groaned, his arms coming around me instantly, locking me into place. He buried his face in my hair, inhaling deeply. "Happy anniversary, Rudina," he whispered. I leaned back, looking into the face of the man who had once terrified the world, and saw only my home. "Happy anniversary, Baldulf." He tightened his grip, his eyes flashing gold as he claimed me all over again. "Mine," he growled. "Yours," I answered. "Always."